Lying on the center of the East Sea, Vietnam enjoyed great opportunities for trade expansion and socio-economic development on the one hand, but also faces big challenges in the course of national maritime sovereignty protection.
Hoàng Sa ngàn bão tố phong ba ta vượt qua lướt sóng con tàu mang tín hiệu trong đất liền mắt em nhìn theo con tàu đi xa mãi giữa nơi biển khơi đang nở rộ ngàn bông hoa xa phố cánh hoa đỏ thắm bao hy vọng
The Geneva Agreement was signed on July the 20th, 1954, ending the war in Indochina. Article 1 of the agreement provided for the provisional military demarcation line at the Ben Hai River along latitude 17 degrees north. This provisional demarcation line was extended by a straight line toward the high sea, according to Article 4 of the agreement. In Article 14 of the agreement, pending a general election for reunification, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam took control of the territory to the north of latitude 17 degrees north, while the French Union forces managed the other territorial part from 17 degrees north latitude southward. The Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa Islands in the East Sea were south to the 17 degree north and therefore came under the control of the French Union forces, including the forces of the state of Vietnam, headed by former King Bao Dai in the south. At that moment, the two archipelagos were under French control. Other countries' military forces were absent. In April 1956, the French Expeditionary Forces formally withdrew from South Vietnam. Before that, the Army of the State of Vietnam, which later turned into the Republic of Vietnam, had replaced the French to take control of the Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa archipelagos since 1950. Also in 1956, China covertly sent troops to occupy the eastern part of Hoàng Sa Islands, including the islands of Phu Lam and Lincoln. In the meantime, Taiwanese forces took illegal occupation of the Ba Binh Island, Itu Aba, the largest island of the Trường Sa archipelago. However, from the legal point of view, the occupation of China and Taiwan did not have any sovereignty significance, since the two archipelagos had been under Vietnam sovereignty long before. As the true owner of the Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa archipelagos, the administration of the Republic of Vietnam continued to exercise its sovereignty and controlled the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. In the meantime, on Hoàng Sa, Pattle Island, there was a whole system of accommodation, military base, meteorological station and lighthouse, a Mother Goddess temple, wharf and Vietnam's sovereignty stele. On June 4, 1956, the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Vietnam, Vu Van Mao, made a statement reiterating Vietnam's sovereignty over the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. After occupying the islands to the west of the Hoàng Sa archipelago, the forces of the Republic of Vietnam landed on the main islands of Trường Sa archipelago on August the 22nd, 1956, and installed the stone sovereignty poles and flew its flags. On October the 22nd, 1956, the President of the Republic of Vietnam issued Decree number 143/NV to alter the administrative boundaries of the provinces and provincial capitals in South Vietnam, placing Trường Sa Islands under the province of Phuoc Tuy before issuing another decree to place it under the province of Ba Gia Vũng Tàu. On February the 21st, 1959, the People's Republic of China had a number of troops disguised as fishermen covertly land on the islands of Hue Nhut, Duy Mong and Quang Hoa to occupy the western island group of Hoàng Sa archipelago. The forces of the Republic of Vietnam promptly thwarted their plot, arresting 82 so-called fishermen and 5 armed fishing boats and escorted them to Da Nang for detention before returning to China. In 1960, the Republic of Vietnam appointed Mr. Nguyen Ba Thuoc, a first-grade administrative officer in Tam Kỳ district of Quang Ngai province, as the administrative envoy for Hoàng Sa, who was later replaced by Mr. Hoàng Yen on June the 27th, 1961. On July the 13th, 1961, the President of the Republic of Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem, signed Decree No. 174/NV, placing Hoàng Sa Archipelago under the province of Quang Nam. The group of islands was previously under the management of Thừa Thiên province. The decree also established a commune-level administrative unit named Dinh Hai under Hoa Van district. The unit was under the management of an administrative envoy. On April the 11th, 1967, the Republic of Vietnam released Decree No. 809/ND/DUHC, appointing Mr. Chun Chuan as the administrative envoy in Dinh Hai Commune, Hoa Vang District, Quang Nam Province. On September the 6th, 1973, the Minister of Home Affairs of the Republic of Vietnam signed Decision No. 42/BNV/HCDP/26, merging the Trường Sa Archipelago into Phuoc Hai Commune, Dat Do District of Phuoc Tuy Province. On September the 24th, 1973, the Republic of Vietnam announced its plan to conduct oil and gas survey offshore the central region's water in the area opposite to Hoàng Sa Archipelago. On January the 15th, 1974, China deployed its armed forces to attack, land, and raise its flag on the islands of Hue Nhut, Quang Anh, Quang Hoa, and Sui Mong to the west of Hoàng Sa Archipelago. On January the 16th, 1974, the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Vietnam, Vuong Van Bac, held a press conference denouncing Beijing's deployment of warships to violate the waters of Hoàng Sa Archipelago and occupation of the islands of Hue Nhut, Quang Anh, Quang Hoa, and Sui Mong in the west of Hoàng Sa Archipelago. From January the 17th to 20th, 1974, two battles took place between the forces of the Republic of Vietnam Navy and China's naval, army, and air forces. Due to the extreme force imbalance, the Republic of Vietnam was defeated, and China succeeded in using force to occupy the entire Hoàng Sa Archipelago. The UN General Assembly Resolution 2625 of October the 24th, 1970, clearly states that the territory of a state shall not be the object of military occupation resulting from the use of force in contravention of the provisions of the Charter. The territory of a state shall not be the object of acquisition by another state resulting from the threat or use of force. No territorial acquisition resulting from the threat or use of force shall be recognized as legal. China's use of force to occupy the Hoàng Sa Archipelago was a serious violation of the UN Charter and UNGA Resolution 2625, and therefore was not valid to establish China's sovereignty over the Hoàng Sa Islands. The Republic of Vietnam, as an observer at the United Nations, had officially requested the President of the UN Secretary Council to examine this act of invasion of Vietnamese territory in Hoàng Sa Archipelago. On January the 19th, 1974, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Vietnam released a press communiqué number 015/BNG/TTBC/TT, calling all peace and justice-loving nations of the world to denounce China's brutal act of invasion, demanding China to stop immediately such dangerous acts. Then, on February the 14th, 1974, the Republic of Vietnam further released the Statement of Government of the Republic of Vietnam on the sovereignty of the Republic of Vietnam over the islands offshore the Republic of Vietnam. A year later, on February the 4th, 1975, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Vietnam released a white paper on Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa archipelagos, rejecting China's use of force to occupy Vietnamese territory. On January the 26th, 1974, the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam made a three-point statement, reiterating the sovereignty and territorial integrity were sacred matters to each nation, demanding the peaceful settlement of territorial disputes in a spirit of equality and mutual respect.
Sau cái hiệp định Paris về Việt Nam năm 73 thì chính phủ cách mạng lâm thời Cộng hòa miền Nam Việt Nam tiếp tục làm cái nhiệm vụ của mình.
After the signature of the 1973 Paris Peace Accords, the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam kept on its task of fight for the implementation of the Paris Peace Accords in Vietnam, and at the same time representing the people of South Vietnam in all international Against this backdrop, as we were struggling hard in South Vietnam for the key principles, we made a three-point statement, i.e., sovereignty and territorial integrity are the sacred matter to each and every nation. Secondly, borders and territory between neighboring countries experiencing historical, sometimes complicated problems required careful study. And thirdly, the related parties should study these problems in the spirit of mutual respect and equality and friendly neighbourliness to settle them by negotiation. Since May 1975, the Navy of the Vietnamese People's Army has taken over the entire Trường Sa archipelago and other islands in the East Sea. On June 5, 1976, the spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam made a statement reiterating Vietnam's sovereignty over the archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa and its right to protect that sovereignty. In September 1975, in a meeting with a delegation of the Communist Party of Vietnam visiting China, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping said, "Disputes between the two countries over the Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa archipelagos would be discussed by the two sides to resolve." This fact was later reiterated in a Chinese Foreign Ministry's memorandum issued on May 12, 1988. On July 2, 1976, at the first session of the 6th National Assembly, a resolution was passed to change the country's title to the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. The Socialist Republic of Vietnam, as a unified Vietnam, inherits the right to ownership of the islands and archipelagos from the preceding governments as per international law provisions, and has the responsibility to continue to confirm and protect Vietnam's sovereignty over the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. The state of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam has deployed many operations to enforce its sovereignty in Trường Sa Islands and protect Vietnam's sovereignty over Hoàng Sa Islands illegally occupied by China. From the legal perspective, Vietnam has enacted many legal documents to confirm Vietnam's sovereignty over the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. In 1977, the Vietnamese government made a statement on Vietnam's waters. In 1982, it further made a statement of the baseline to calculate the breadth of its territorial sea. In 2003, the Vietnamese National Assembly passed the law on national boundaries, and in 2012, it further adopted the law of the Sea of Vietnam. All of these legislations confirm Vietnam's sovereignty over the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. On June 23, 1994, the National Assembly passed a resolution on the ratification of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, stating that the National Assembly once again confirms Vietnam's sovereignty over the archipelagos of the Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa Islands. In 1979, 1981, 1984 and 1988, Vietnam released white papers providing historical and legal evidence to confirm its sovereignty over the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. Vietnam continues to assert its sovereignty over the archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa at regional and international conferences and meetings. At the Second Asian Meteorological Conference in 1980, Vietnam worked hard to have its meteorological station in Hoàng Sa remain in the list of stations under the international city. At the World Administrative Radio Conference in 1984, Vietnam's request on broadcasting radio signal over the space of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa archipelagos was accepted. Taking into account the need to manage the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa, Vietnam has stipulated many documents to establish the administrative areas of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. In 1982, the Vietnamese government made decision number 194 to establish the Hoàng Sa Island District under Quang Nam, Da Nang Province, and Trường Sa Island District under Dong Nai Province. In December 1982, the 7th National Assembly adopted a resolution to merge Trường Sa District into the province of Phu Khanh, now Khanh Hoa Province. In November 1996, at the 10th session of the 9th National Assembly, a resolution was passed to merge Hoàng Sa District into Da Nang, a city under direct central management. The administrations at Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa districts have since been exercising their full functions. In 1988, China used force to further occupy a number of shoals in Trường Sa archipelago. Prior to that incident, China in 1987 made drastic preparation for the plot. The Chinese Navy conducted successive military exercises in the south of the East Sea and the Western Pacific. In January 1988, a large number of warships, including many missile carriers and destroyers, moved down from Hainan Island to Trường Sa archipelago, challenging and obstructing normal activities of Vietnamese shipping vessels in the areas of the Fiery Cross Reef and Qua Turon Reef. Chinese troops hoisted their flags on the two reefs and sent warships off to prevent and provoke Vietnamese shipping vessels from bringing supplies to the islands under Vietnamese Navy protection. On March the 14th, 1988, China dispatched a 6-vessel flotilla, including escorts number 502, 509 and 531, armed with missiles and 100mm cannons to attack the reefs of Len Dao, Lansdowne, Ko Lin, Johnson North Colling, and Gak Ma, Johnson, of the Sing Ton, Sin Cao group in Trường Sa archipelago. The attack on Vietnamese shipping vessels by Chinese armed warships left 64 Vietnamese Navy servicemen and 3 ships ever remained under the sea of the fatherland. By using force in the attack, China has illegally occupied the reefs of Fiery Cross, Qua Turon, Johnson, Gavin, Hughes, and Su Bi in Trường Sa archipelago of Vietnam. Vietnamese Navy soldiers have heroically protected their fatherland's flag, the symbol of sovereignty, until their last minute. Though knowing that they might have to sacrifice, these men were resolved not to step back, acted bravely and heroically, accepting to devote their lives to the country's islands and seas until their last breath. All members of the crew on HQ 571 naval ship would like to pay our deepest respect to the example offered by hero and martyr Lieutenant Colonel Chun Duk Tong, Vice Commander of Brigade 146. Hero and martyr Captain Vu Phi Chu, captain of HQ 604 naval ship, and hero and martyr On Song Chen Van Phuoc, deputy commander of Johnson Reef at the attack by the enemy. Despite the fierce fire, they calmly commanded their soldiers to protect the ship and the reef as well as the fatherland's flag. It would be impossible to recount all the brave sacrifices of these 64 officers and soldiers of the Vietnamese People's Navy. They fell in glory and with a firm trust in our final victory. Their names and pride shook the enemy's steps. They now rest here forever, in the embrace of the islands and the sea of the homeland. Today, under the sky of Trường Sa, and feeling the souls of those Navy officers and soldiers who have fallen for the protection of our maritime sovereignty around, we want to express our deepest regret and gratitude from the bottom of our hearts, pledging to follow their footsteps to strengthen their faith and trust in us to firmly protect the fatherland's islands and seas. With all our respect, admiration and gratitude, we would offer flowers and incense, praying for their eternal peace in the heart of the nation, giving us the inspiration to continue our duty of protection of the land and sea and the sky of Vietnam, forever keeping the islands of Trường Sa as part of our homeland. The fatherland's flag flew under the rain of shells. The last minute the rocks proved our boundaries. You made yourself a border marker to thwart the enemy from our seas. In 1988, Vietnam informed the United Nations and sent out several diplomatic notes to denounce the act of illegal occupation of a number of shoals and reefs in Trường Sa archipelago of Vietnam. On the other hand, in a spirit of goodwill to settle all disputes through peaceful negotiations, Vietnam has, in its diplomatic notes dated March the 17th and 26th of 1988, proposed that the two sides negotiated to settle the disputes, only to China's refusal and continued illegal occupation of the reefs. On April the 13th, 1988, China incorporated the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa into the province of Hainan. A day later, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Social Republic of Vietnam launched an official protest over this illegal act. The Vietnamese government has conducted many activities to exercise in practice its sovereignty, while at the same time resolutely protests all acts of violation of its sovereignty in the archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa, under various forms such as handing diplomatic notes and the statements of spokespersons of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At correspondences, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam has repeatedly affirmed that Vietnam has legal and historical evidence to confirm its undisputable sovereignty over Paracel and Spratly archipelagos. All activities carried out by foreign countries over these archipelagos without the consent of Vietnam are absolutely illegal. Vietnam resolutely protests the activities that violate its sovereignty over the two archipelagos and requests the end of these wrong activities. In all negotiations on border and territory between Vietnam and China, the Vietnamese delegation always confirms Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa archipelagos when talking of maritime territory. To motivate the soldiers on duty in the far-off islands, the leaders of our party and state have made many visits to the areas to give more resolve to them in the protection of the homeland's sacred islands. In early 1985, General Van Tien Dung, Minister of National Defense, visited Trường Sa Islands. In 1987, Admiral Giáp Văn Khương, Navy Commander, made another visit to Trường Sa. and in 1994, then Deputy Prime Minister also visited the archipelago. On June the 21st, 2012, China announced a decision to establish the so-called Sansha City that includes Vietnam's Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa islands, covering a sea area of over 2 million square kilometers. Later, China conducted a series of operations to consolidate what it calls Sansha City, establishing a military post on Hoàng Sa Island. These activities are illegal and seriously violate Vietnam's sovereignty over the archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa, violating at the same time the UN Charter as well as the norms of international law, going against the spirit of the Declaration on the Conducts of Parties in the South China Sea, DOC.
If we look at the history of the paracels, both Vietnam and China think that they have a strong case for sovereignty to those islands. And this, of course, is not regulated by the law of the sea, but by other parts of international law.
When you talk of COC and DOC, and you talk of you cannot say that the only difference between the two is a legally binding. The question is this: which country has actually rejected DOC?
That is, we are against coercion, the violation of international law and agreements. That includes UNCLOS and the DOC. And so we are concerned about what is taking place, and it appears to be in violation of these agreements.
Immediately after China's announcement of its decision to establish the Sansha City, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam has released a diplomatic note to denounce the decision. The spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam also issued a statement to that effect. The Philippines also issued a diplomatic note to protest, and the spokesperson of the Foreign Department stated that the government of the Philippines expresses its deep concerns and strongly regrets China's decision to establish a military post in the island of Woody Island of Paracel Islands. In a statement dated August 3, 2012, the U.S. State Department spokesperson rejected China's establishment of the so-called Sansha City and a military post here. Prior to that, the U.S. Senate adopted Resolution 524, wherein U.S. congressmen strongly denounced China's acts over the so-called Sansha City. Legal and historical documents from the feudal time to the French domination period and today have all confirmed strongly that Vietnam has established and been exercising and protecting its sovereignty over the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa in a peaceful and incessant manner and in accordance with the provisions of international law. Professor Gillian Triggs, Dean of the University of Sydney Law School, has got a painstaking research on maritime boundary disputes in the South China Sea, international legal issues, and argues that the better view is that China cannot claim title by conquest, and Vietnam has protested repeatedly to maintain its historical title. In these circumstances, international law is likely to recognize that Vietnam has a better right to sovereignty over the Paracel Islands than China. On the Trường Sa, Spratly Islands, Professor Gillian Triggs observes, through French occupation and administration during the colonial period, Vietnam appears to have a relatively stronger claim to the Spratly Islands than do other states. It has an ancient claim through the emperors of Annam, and since 1956 has occupied many islands in the group. With the goodwill of a peace-loving nation and the aspiration for peace and stability in the East Sea to promote prosperous development of the entire region, Vietnam has always been ready to employ peaceful means to settle disagreements with the parties concerned on the basis of international law. On November the 25th, 2011, at the second session of the 13th National Assembly, the Prime Minister of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, His Excellency Mr. Nguyen Thanh Dung, has made clear the Vietnamese position and viewpoint on the settlement of disputes relating to the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa.
Lập trường nhất quán của chúng ta là quần đảo Hoàng Sa là thuộc chủ quyền.
Vietnam's consistent policy is that the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa belong to the sovereignty of Vietnam. Vietnam is for the application of peaceful means in accordance with the UN Charter, the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, to pursue its sovereignty claim. On the Trường Sa Islands, Vietnam's policy is to seriously observe the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the DOC, as well as other agreements signed between Vietnam and China. Accordingly, the parties should maintain the status quo and not further complicate the situation that might affect regional peace and stability. Throughout history, the state of Vietnam in different periods has been continuously exploited, managed and exercised its sovereignty in a peaceful manner over the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa, Paracel, and Trường Sa, Spratly. The two groups of islands have really become an inseparable part of the sacred territory of the Vietnamese nation. The sacred soul of this nation is deeply marked on the two archipelagos of Hoàng Sa and Trường Sa. Rivers might dry up and mountains might erode, but the truth will never change.
Vầng trăng sáng trên biển xa, vầng trăng sáng ngoài đảo xa, Hoàng nghe tiếng ngân nga ru lòng ta bao lời ca quê nhà. Đây Trường Sa, kia Hoàng Sa, quần đảo tím hiên ngang, tiếng hùng ca ngời sáng. Tháng năm con tàu quen sóng cả quen gió biển, nước ra màu nắng tươi giòn thêm anh thép. Cánh chim hải âu bốn mùa về cùng anh vui xa khơi, cánh hoa biển trắng là kỷ niệm anh gửi về tặng em. Đây súng khoác trên vai trăng đầu núi soi hình anh đang đứng đó, nhắn về đất liền cánh buồm chờ đầy tin yêu. Sóng du mối tình đầy thủy thủ càng thêm yêu. Đây con tàu xa thôi, đây con tàu xa thôi. Ơi ánh mắt em yêu như biển xanh, như trời xanh trong nắng mới. Nhớ ca dáng hình em mùa gặt nặng đôi vai. Sóng du mối tình đời thủy thủ càng thêm vui. Đây con tàu xa thôi, đây con tàu xa.